Now, if you haven't seen this yet, I'm going to put the headline up on the screen here so you can see it. But this is one of those stories where the headline really is only a fraction of the news that they just broke here. This is a big deal, what the Washington Post just published. And there are really two big deals within it. There are two bottom lines to this story that they just broke tonight. The first one is what is reflected in the headline. I'm just going to quote the lead directly here. The CIA has concluded in a secret assessment that Russia intervened in the 2016 election to help Donald Trump win the presidency, rather than just to undermine confidence in the U.S. electoral system. They're citing officials briefed on the matter. Quote, intelligence agencies have identified individuals with connections to the Russian government who provided WikiLeaks with thousands of hacked emails from the DNC and others, including Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. According to U.S. officials, these individuals are actors known to the intelligence community who are part of a wider Russian operation to boost Donald Trump's chances at winning and hurt Hillary Clinton's chances. A senior U.S. official briefed on an intelligence presentation made to U.S. senators. Stick a pin in that sourcing there for a second. That person is then quoted saying this: it is the assessment of the intelligence community that Russia's goal here was to favor one candidate over the other, to help Trump get elected. That's the consensus view. Okay, so that is the first part of this breaking news tonight from the Washington Post. The CIA has told U.S. officials and senators, secretly, that when Russia hacked the emails of Clinton's campaign chair and the DNC, when they fed that information to the U.S. public via WikiLeaks, it wasn't just some chaos plan to make Americans wonder about the integrity of our election system. They weren't just trying to make us feel oogie about voting, right? They weren't just trying to make us feel like our democracy was shaky and vulnerable. It was a specifically directed thing. They were overtly part of a Russian op to try to win the American presidential election for Donald Trump. Okay, so that's one. Here's the other part. And I said stick a pin in that sourcing stuff there for a reason. I think it's always important to pay attention to the sourcing, but particularly on stories like this. And obviously the reporters from the Washington Post are not going to tell us who their sources are, and we would never ask them to. But they do describe them. They describe their officials, the officials they're talking to, and their sources for the story as, variously throughout the story, officials briefed on the matter, or U.S. officials, or at one point, like I said, stick a pin in it, a senior U.S. official briefed on an intelligence presentation made to U.S. senators. Okay, so that sourcing ends up being a big part of that story, because this assessment by the CIA, this is not a public assessment. The CIA has not made this incredibly inflammatory assessment public. They haven't said overtly to us, to you and me, to citizens, that Russia tried to win the election for Donald Trump. But that assessment is now in the paper. That's now on the front page of the Washington Post. And the reason it is because the CIA didn't keep this assessment to itself. They gave this assessment to people in the U.S. government. And the question is, I think that sort of the most disturbing part of what has just been broken here is how much of this information they gave to people in the U.S. government before the election. And that's, I think, probably the biggest part of this story here. This is totally new tonight. The Post describes what they say was a secret briefing for congressional leaders in September. And again, I'm just going to quote directly here. This has just come out within the last hour, and so I haven't, written this up and given you a big explanatory thing about it. I'm just going to tell you what they got. This is from the Post. By mid-September, White House officials had decided it was time to name and shame the Russian government by publicly blaming Russia for doing this. But they worried that doing so just weeks before the election, unilaterally, without bipartisan congressional backing, that would make President Obama vulnerable to charges that he was using intelligence for political purposes. Instead, officials devised a plan. They would seek bipartisan support from top lawmakers. So they set up a secret meeting with the Gang of 12, the leaders of the House and Senate, the ranking members of the Intelligence Committee and the Homeland Security Committee in both the House and the Senate. That's the Gang of 12. Obama dispatched counterterrorism director Lisa Monaco, FBI director James Comey, Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson. He sent them to go make the pitch to these leaders in Congress for a, quote, show of solidarity and bipartisan in a secure room in the Capitol used for briefings involving classified information. These administration officials broadly laid out the evidence that U.S. spy agencies had collected, showing Russia's role in cyber intrusions in at least 2 states and in hacking the emails of the Democratic organizations and individuals. They made a case for a united bipartisan front in response to what one official described as the threat posed by unprecedented meddling by a foreign power in our election process. Now get this. The Democratic leaders in the room unanimously agreed on the need to take the threat seriously. Republicans, however, were divided. Some of the Republicans in the briefing seemed opposed to the idea of going public with such explosive allegations in the final stages of an election. According to several officials, Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell raised doubts about the underlying intelligence. He made clear to the administration that he would consider any effort by the White House to challenge the Russians publicly to be an act of partisan politics. And then the Post helpfully notes, after the election, Trump chose McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao, as his nominee for transportation secretary. This is stunning stuff, right? I mean, this is just broken within the last hour in the Washington Post. They're reporting that the CIA not only concluded that the Russians intervened in the election, stole information, publicized stolen information to help Donald Trump win the presidency, but the CIA gave its information about Russia to the leadership in the House and the Senate. And the White House wanted to make a big public bipartisan stand against it, and Republicans said no. Mitch McConnell specifically said no. No, don't tell the public. And so we held the election with the leadership in Congress knowing full well what Russia was doing, and we all went to vote while they sat on that.